Hey guys, good morning. We are in God's Word today, 1 Corinthians chapter 9. Paul is speaking to the Corinthian church because there are some people who have been, they've been calling Paul's actions out as though he's trying to seek to gain something. And in many cases, Paul would just choose to not defend himself, but he understood the necessity of him being able to pour into the lives of these people. And so he is actually going to go on a defense for how he's been acting with the Corinthians. And it's pretty interesting because, they're basically saying he's doing this all for selfish gain. And he says, listen, wait a second. You know what? And here we are. In the previous verses, it says, do you think that I have no right to be able to eat or drink and while I'm doing the work of the Lord? Verse 8 would go on. It says, do I say these things as a mere man, or does the law say the same also? For it is written in the law of Moses, you shall not muzzle an ox while it treads out the grain. It is oxen God is concerned about. Is it oxen God is concerned about? Or does he say it altogether for our sakes? For our sakes, no doubt this is written, that he who plows should plow in hope, and he who threshes in hope should be a partaker of his hope. If we have sown spiritual things for you, is it a great thing that we reap your material things? If others are partakers of this right over you, are we not even more? Nevertheless, we have not used this right, but endure all things lest we hinder the gospel of Christ. Paul is making this incredible case. He says, listen, you're saying that we're trying to do all this work for some measure of selfish gain, specifically as it relates to perhaps the making of money, the whatever off of the ministry. And he goes on and he says, listen, do you understand, you are the work that I'm doing, the spiritual work that is being done has a benefit potentially on a material side of things. But then he says in verse 12, which is so incredible, he says, you know what? Even though there's a right, there's a precedent that's set in the Old Testament, right? That the workers are worth their hire, that the ox gets to eat while he treads out the grain, all that sort of stuff. But he says, I never used this right. I never took. I never did anything that was used for some measure of perceived selfish gain. Now, did he have a right to it? Absolutely. But he didn't do that. Why? Why was it that Paul would end up living amongst the Corinthian people in such a different way that there would be no capacity for people, he lived so differently that he wouldn't take a dime for the work of the ministry that he was doing. That's what he says. He says the reason why he did it is that he would endure all things lest we hinder the gospel. That there was a priority and a precedent that he said, listen, I am not going to become a stumbling block to anyone. Even though he would have had a right to, he wouldn't take it. And so this is something that I know for myself, I have a very personal response. I definitely fall in the same category as Paul here. Does that mean that every pastor doesn't have shouldn't take a salary or whatever that might look like? You know what? There's a precedent for it. They do a lot of work. It's a lot of work. I'm just so thankful too that I can be able to sit back and not ever have any sort of material gain from the church. And so that's really the heart behind anybody who serves, is that the gain that may come is something that is far more than any material thing that could ever be offered. I think about, what do I gain, right, by being able to pour into people and be able to be a pastor? I look around and I get to gain the fact that I get to watch people's lives be transformed. That is something that is a blessing. That is an honor. That is a gift. That is something that drives everything that should be done. And that should be the same with everyone. Why would you serve in a church? Because you want to see people's lives transformed. You want to be able to serve those who are alongside of you. And why do you do it? You do it because you're honoring the Lord, and that's all that matters. And so when you read something like this, it should challenge you. One, you know what? Hey, Paul's making a pretty good case that it is okay that people are paid in terms of ministry. But two, his heart was that if it was going to be a stumbling block, he would never get paid. And so I love the fact I have the flexibility to make that same choice. But every other person who's not paid has the responsibility to make that same choice. I'm going to serve despite what gain might come, because maybe just one more might be transformed by Jesus. I love you guys.